So, ladies and gentlemen, Luke, financial advisor.
Morning, everyone. Right, so what I want to do is just take you through what we do as a company. So a very, very basic look at if we get a new inquiry through, what do we do as a company, basically, and how do we speak to them and find out what they're looking to achieve, and also how do we then implement any changes and recommend them a plan. But most importantly, also to review that plan on a regular basis, because that's the main thing is, we can do some work now, but the real work starts in reviewing that and making sure it stays in line with their circumstances and the client's needs. So very briefly, just to give you an idea of who we are, we're based down in Colchester in Essex. The company was started by our MD, Ed Fairey, in 2008, just after the last financial crisis. As I said previously, we cover the East Anglia and South East, but with clients throughout the UK. We look after around £450 million worth of pensions and investments on an entirely independent and whole of market basis, which is important because we can advise on any type of products and also any provider within the market. So you know that you're getting sort of the best deal in terms of the provider and the type of product that we recommend to you. Just a little bit about myself. I've worked in the industry now for the last 13 years, 8 of which I've been advising clients such as in such areas as pensions, investments and protection. Right, so the financial planning process. So, when we get a new inquiry through, I would say it's separated into 4 main categories. So we have an initial consultation. After that, should the client wish to proceed to the next stage, we then get the information in. So the big thing is finding out what they've got, because a lot of clients will say, well, I've got this statement here. It might be Aviva. I've got this one here, Scottish Widows. A lot of people don't have, an idea of really what they have got. And also from the statement, some of them can be fairly detailed, but there is a lot of technical information we need to double check on to make sure it's right to still amalgamate them or do something with them should we see fit. Then what we then do is come back to the client for a second meeting and we present the recommendations, and then obviously subject to their agreement, we implement them. And then finally, we review the financial plan on a regular basis with them from annual meetings or, more frequency if they require. Okay, so initial consultation. We'll ask them things like about their financial circumstance, so the basics like age, marital status, health, dependence, things like that, and also what they're looking to achieve. So the big thing with financial advice, where a lot of people think, well, they'll just recommend me to invest in some funds. Well, yes, that is part of it. However, the biggest thing is, and I always say, is it's client objective first, products second. So, when someone will say, well, I've heard ISAs are good, for example, such a very sort of simple statement, my first question is, where have you heard that and why do you think they're good? And most of the time, clients will not be really able to answer it. It's just that they might have heard it with Martin Lewis on the telly or seen an advert. And so, once you start sort of educating clients, you then can say to them, well, look, that's not really right for you because these have got the disadvantages, whereas this product is correct for you because you want to achieve X, Y, and Z. So it's really, really important to achieve, to align anything with clients' objectives. So we then talk about, retirement potentially and future plans. And the biggest thing we also talk about is what their attitude to risk is. So if I go on to this part here, so a little bit more detail into attitude to risk. So what we do is we have an in-depth conversation with the client to understand what their opinion is on that subject, because it is very, very opinion-based investment risk. It can be down to, past experiences, if they've had a bad experience with, say, an endowment that didn't pay out, or they've had a PPI claim in the past, their expectations or their what they think of financial services could be damaged somewhat, so they don't want to take a huge amount of risk. So one of the things we show them here is we have 5 levels of risk, basically. So this is cautious, number 1, and 5 is adventurous here. Okay, so what we show them here is this is the returns, or the best and worst 1-year returns that you would have achieved over the last 20 years. So what you can see here is that this gives them an idea of where we sit, really. So, in our cautious portfolio, you would have got the best return of, say, 24%, but then the worst return of -14%. going forward. And this is the bit what I always say to clients is it's the downturns that people focus on the most, because I've never had an email or phone call from a client to say, can you please explain why my portfolio has gone up 5% this year? It doesn't happen. It's only when markets don't perform very well that you start getting questions, which is fair enough. So this gives them an idea of what the average return is, and also what the worst and the best and worst outcomes could be. So this can sometimes sway them. And also we have a questionnaire that we fill in with clients as well. Okay. So information gathering stage, we ask a vast array of different questions from their existing providers. So we look at past performance, what their charges are, options in retirement, and also things like, is there any like charges for them to transfer away, or is there any guarantees that would mean that we recommend they stick with their existing providers? So some people would say, well, I want to get all my pensions or investments together, but then what they won't say is, what they wouldn't want me to do is just do that for the sake of it. And if there is something on their existing plans or investments that would say keep them because there's something valuable on there, then obviously they would want us to do that. So we always do double check on these types of things. So what we then come through is the implementation stage. So we go through a really, really detailed report with them, summarizing their circumstances, their objectives, and then obviously what our objectives are to suit what our recommendations are to suit their objectives. So for example, this just gives you a little bit of an insight. So if someone is now retiring and they want to take an income from their investments, whether it be their pension, ISA, or whatever, what we will show them is we'll map out roughly how long they could expect their income to last, for example. So this is a really good illustration. So in this case, this client, I would recommend them to take a little bit more income from their pensions or investments, purely because it's going to last them easily for the rest of their life. Because even on a worst case scenario, we would estimate that they'd still have around about 40% of their investment still there by the time they pass away, on average at age 90. So they could live longer than that, but you can see there's plenty of leeway there. So in this instance, I would say to someone, well, look, you could have a much more comfortable retirement than you thought you could do. And again, for some people, that's a really an enlightening sort of process, because, they'll think, well, we might not be that well off in retirement. However, I can show them through, graphs and financial projections that actually they are going to be well off in retirement. And so then the next question then comes is, what do you want to do in retirement if you now know that you are more well off than what you thought? Those holidays or those house renovations or a new car that you've always wanted could become a reality. And again, that's difficult to put a price on that. It's really down to their own circumstances, isn't it? So finally, the review of their annual, on the review of their plan. This is the most important thing, really. So we normally do it on an annual basis. However, depending on the complexities of the case, we can offer an increased frequency there. So what normally means there's a big change in a review is changing client circumstance. So as people get older, retirement, health, inheritance is another thing. So we've had quite a few clients recently who have received inheritances, and that can change the dynamic of any financial plan. Changing market conditions. So every year we will come to them with some changes to the investments that we recommend to them. Some years are more subtle because, for example, this year the returns have been really good. So we're not going to dismantle the whole portfolio and decide to change it again because things are going well at the moment. Equally, if there has been a downturn, obviously we need a bit of a rethink in terms of what we invest in. And then finally, changes in tax and legislation. The recent budget, as Gary was saying, there's been quite a few changes now that affects clients' plans. And obviously we have to change their plan accordingly. So lots of different parameters there. I could have gone through, I probably could have spent another hour doing stuff like that. And I'm not going to obviously, put you through all that, but it just gives you a little bit of an outline of what we do for clients. And hopefully dispels a few myths in terms of what we sometimes people will say we only just do a certain element of that. But as you can see, there's so many complexities there. And within each of those little bullet points, I could probably do another 10 minutes presentation in terms of detail there. So, that was what I wanted to go through in terms of how we treat a new inquiry. And if you do know of anyone or anyone here who is looking for a bit of a refresh of their finances, then always have to have a free initial consultation with them just to go through what we can offer and see if there is anything that we can enhance for their situation.
Brilliant stuff, Luke. Very, very good. Wow. Any questions at all? Any questions, any comments? Yes, funny, isn't it? You know, your rises, you know, you're 53%, but they'll be like, oh, it's gone down by 20. It's funny, isn't it? As you say, they only ever look at the negatives, whereas the
Well,
top up.
yeah, that's kind of that's the bit there. Whereas when I showed you, if it had gone up, you know, say if I'd have got 30% for them and they could have got 40%, you know, all right, people have said, oh, okay, but they're not that bothered about that. It's when they've done 15% down, but the one that maybe was right for them has only gone down 10%. That makes a much more difficult conversation. And it does happen, you know, clients do have to get used to that. And you know, obviously, last 5 years with the pandemic, wars and energy crisis and things, we have, you know, clients have been through the mill with their investments. But it's just about education. And you have to be careful there because sometimes it can sound patronizing that when you say educate someone, there's always a thing, well, I do know a little bit about it, but it's just talking about to clients about their options, and then you know there's more questions that come up from there really. So yeah, that's how we work really on a very, very headline basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions, folks? Chris and then Rachel.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when you have, you know, a retirement pot, do you assume that the pot has to stay there, or at least some part of it has to stay there? Or like, would you say, well, until say 100 years, we're gonna go down to zero with it? Because from majority of, you know, investment advice or stuff like that, they always say, well, you should take out 4% because this is what you earn, and then the pot stays there. But like you've said, somebody can take out more and have a better quality of their life, and think, well, I know it's kind of maybe not nice to say, but it's kind of my money, and I don't really want to think I'm gonna pass it all, you know, to my kids. Why not use a bit of it and actually take out more, because there's a big pot, you know, there to
Yeah.
take out.
So to answer your question, the 4% rule is a rule of thumb that we always will say to clients is that's a sustainable level that you can take out. So 4 to 5% of your pot. So i.e., if you got 100,000, you could take 4 to 5,000 out of that per year, and that would last you for the rest of your life on average. But then other people, you know, they have got more than that. And when you say to them, well, are you going to leave it to the children then because they're not spending enough? And the thing you have to stress to them is early on in retirement, that's when most people have the ability to spend the money as well. Because when you're in your late 70s, early 80s, are you going to be going on the holidays? Are you going to be buying the new cars, doing the home renovations, you know? So even your ability, you know, if you're in bad health, your ability to even spend the income is hampered. So, you know, when clients will say, well, I say, well, do you want to leave it to the children then? And then the answer is, well, not really. They're going to get the house, we've paid for a wedding or a house deposit or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, spend it now then, really, which does sound really strange from a financial advisor to say, spend your money. But at the same time,
Live a bit.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a bit like an estate agent saying, no, don't sell your house, isn't it? Type thing, you know? So, but at the same time, we want to do right by the clients. And if they don't spend it now, they could get to 80, 85 and think, well, I've got this massive pot still, and I could have had a much more enjoyable retirement. So it's really down to client circumstance. I've got some people who spend too much compared to their pot, and I've got other people who don't spend enough. And it's just kind of finding that happy medium, really, you know. So, yeah.
Good stuff. Rachel, please.
I'm just going to start off by saying, Luke, you just made me giggle there because my parents have just told me that they're going on they've booked another holiday next year. My dad turned around and said, because his free travel insurance runs out when he's 80. I'm like, no, it's because you want to spend my inheritance. But no, my question to you, Luke, is what would you say is your most frequently asked question?
Oh, frequently asked question. I suppose the thing what a lot of people say now is our biggest inquiry type is retirement, basically. However, the second one and becoming more prevalent is people in their sort of like late 40s to mid 50s, I'd say, and they've got all these different pensions they've had throughout their employment. They've got all the statements on the table, and they say, what does this mean to me? Because you can read a statement that says Aviva pension 60,000 in it, Scottish Widows pension 40,000 in it. You know, you kind of know what, you know, most people have a rough idea of what they got in their pensions, but it's then actually saying to someone, what is it that you would like to do in your retirement? Now, some people will say, you know, I want to continue to work, I enjoy my job. Others, you know, will say, well, I'd like to go down to say 3 days a week by age 60, if you could do. I want to fully retire at 65, for example. You know, and that's kind of like saying, well, at the moment, you wouldn't be able to do that. However, you've got another 10 to 15 years to do something about it. Here's what I think you should, or you need to do to realize that. And obviously that just gives them a bit of clarity. So I suppose the most frequently asked one would be, what does all this mean for me, basically? And that's a bit what I enjoy doing, because, you know, we will charge fees to do this, like any business will, but it's difficult to put a price on being able to tell someone that they can retire when they want to. Does that make sense there? You know, there's no, you can't say, oh, well, I'll pay £1,000 for that because that was really valuable advice. It's kind of, so it's the kind of the emotional side of it. Whereas, you know, some clients I go to and say, well, look, you're actually going to be better off when you're retired than you are working in some scenarios. And to me, that's a really, really good, you know, it makes you want to do that, because you actually, you know, you've actually laid out what they can do. And, you know, it does sound a bit corny sometimes, but, you know, they can have the retirement they want to. And you know, if they thought that they couldn't go on a dream holiday and now they can through your advice, well, that's great, isn't it? You know, so yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Any more questions, folks? Any more questions? Any more comments? Yes, Gary.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, obviously from a personal perspective as well, with the inheritance tax, have you started to sort of model what that might look for people, or how's that sort of going to impact you guys as well?
Yeah, we haven't. The reason is for the the pensions coming into inheritance tax part of it. That there's a consultation, I believe, excuse me, that ends January end of January next year. So like anything, the devil's going to be in the detail. But yeah, I suppose I spoke to a client yesterday who already had an inheritance tax issue, but now with the pension moving into it, you know, it's compounded even more, or will do in 2.5 years' time. So, you know, I've kind of said, well, look, I would have had this conversation with you to say we need to do something about this. However, now it's a bit more prevalent because you know, we need to move forward a bit quicker, because you've still got an inheritance tax problem. It's just now bigger because the pension is going to form part of your estate in 2.5 years' time. So we have started to, but the thing is, the devil's always in the detail, and I think there's going to be some changes to what people think the tax is on pension. Not to get into too much detail, but you know, so yeah, we will see what happens from there, and then pick it up with clients going forward. Really, so yeah.